Welcome to It's All in Your Head podcast. This is episode 18. Today we're going to be talking about boundaries in relationships, and I'm here with my colleague Tara Ray. Tara, what do you think about this topic today?
It's so much, but I think that it's important that we start to talk about this in this context, especially as we are hoping to help people build healthier relationships.
I agree. This is actually one of my favorite topics because I feel like as people are dating and building relationships, the boundaries need to be set right up front if boundaries are going to be set. In other words, we have to carve out a space for ourselves in a relationship right at the beginning. What do you
Mhm.
think about that?
I think that that's right at the beginning. Yep.
Mhm. And
Because
I think, go ahead.
people get into relationships and then they're kind of like during that honeymoon phase of meeting each other, they're telling each other everything, and they're not seeing any of the negative qualities a person might have. So they're less likely to set boundaries in the beginning. And then after someone crosses a line that they don't even know that they've crossed, then they want to start setting boundaries for that so that they're hoping that they don't touch that nerve again. But if you can establish those boundaries in the beginning, then it's easier for you to navigate those issues when they come up.
That's absolutely true. And when you talk about that phase at the beginning of a relationship, that's actually bonding happening in the brain, and it's a brain syndrome. It feels almost like a drug. And
Mhm.
it happens for about the first 5 to 6 months that the brain feels like it's on a drug. And then the brain gets used to that bonding firing, the bonding hormones firing, and the brain settles down. And then suddenly you can see all the parts that don't work in the relationship. And people will say, and then he changed. Well, he didn't change, your brain changed. And
Mhm.
suddenly you can see all the parts that don't work. And a lot of a negotiation happens in that second part of the relationship. And people either break up or they learn to negotiate through their boundaries at that point. And a lot of really good stuff can happen in that second part of a relationship if people do it well. But
Mhm.
those boundaries are absolutely necessary, and nobody can read your mind. So guess what? You have to
Absolutely.
set them.
Mhm. And that's the thing that happens. They will start to do what I call cave, because now I'm in this situation or this relationship. I like how this person makes me feel. So instead of me addressing those things that are problematic, let them go. But then those little teeny weeny resentments that get built up start to get built up over time. And then the other person, typically, this might be sexist, but the man goes, why are you tripping? What's the issue now? What happened? We were fine. When in her mind, she's saying, I wasn't fine.
Right.
I was just letting these things go. And they think that that's compromise, but that's not compromise, that's caving. And so knowing the difference between compromise and caving is very important also.
Absolutely. And in fact, if you're going to feel angry and resentful, that's your sign inside of yourself that a boundary needed to be set. You have an internal meter right there that if I'm feeling angry and resentful, I needed to step up and set a boundary. And it can be done kindly, gently, and firmly. And that is actually the rules in a relationship. People don't realize that relationships have rules. And if we keep breaking those rules, relationships will end. Kindly,
Mhm.
gently, and firmly is the only effective way to set a boundary. Yelling and screaming has never been an effective way to set a boundary.
All the yelling and screaming does is reinforces the negative that you're trying to get away from.
Right. And it's never been effective. It's one of the major causes of relationships ending. If you have to yell and scream, it just means that possibly a boundary wasn't set soon enough, that something got let go until it was such an issue that it became a yell and a scream. So why did it get let go that long? Why didn't I say something sooner? Why did I let it go until I felt I had to yell and scream? Right. And so paying attention to the tiny little irritations or the things like that is really important. Now, sometimes things do need to be let go. Sometimes if this person is more important than the thing I'm about to bring up, there are things that we do have to let go. We can't let every single tiny little thing be an issue
Mhm.
because sometimes the person is more important than this thing. Because I know some people who feel like every tiny little thing is an issue, but we have to really weigh it. Is this person in front of me more important than the issue I'm about to bring up? Or in the long run, is my self-respect more important? And yes, these are weighty things that we do have to constantly be thinking about back and forth.
Mhm.
And that's what makes relationships so difficult to navigate, isn't
Mhm, definitely. I
it?
what comes to mind when I think about when people are meeting, I tell people if you explain yourself, you never have to make an excuse. And what I mean by that is taking the self awareness that you've learned on this journey to wanting to be in a relationship and voicing that. So you can say to people, like, someone's like, man, she never likes to go out. What's the issue? She never likes to go out. But you can explain, I'm a person who's a little more anxious. I don't like big crowds. So if we're gonna go out in the beginning, I'd like to go to places that are kind of more subdued or there are less people. That's easy. And then the person's not wondering what's wrong with you, what's on your mind. You've explained yourself and you never have to make an excuse. So the excuse would be he says, let's go to the ball game. And you, oh, well, I got something to do. And instead of just saying that kind of an environment is not comfortable for me right now.
And people can make a decision about that too. If you're a very outgoing person and you want someone who will always be, able and willing to go to places like that, then that's an important thing too to understand about yourself. And I always have people write down a list of what they want in a partner and let them know that they're not going to get everything on that list, but there are a few things on that list that are necessary, that are going to be the things that I have them put a star next to. And some of the things that don't have a star next to them are probably going to be a little more expendable. But there are things on that list that are going to be necessary in order for them to be really happy. And then I have them just as they're dating, weigh the things on that list to make sure that they're important. And the things that they put on that list are things like the type of lifestyle that they want to have. Some people are very outgoing and want to travel and they want to be able to go to parties, different things like that. And some people are more stay inside, homebody kind of people. And that's the lifestyle that they want. And it's really important that you have a similar lifestyle with your partner. Those
Mhm.
things are important. And you seek out somebody who wants a similar lifestyle. Remember that your compatibility is not really more than about 31% compatible with anybody on the planet. And so you're really trying to take a small sliver of compatibility and enhance it as much as possible. And this comes from Dr. Gottman's research, trying to enhance as much as possible just this small sliver of overlapping compatibility that you have with somebody. So it's really important to understand that you always have to set boundaries in a relationship with anybody that you're in, not just a love relationship.
Mhm.
That we are all trying to get our needs met on this planet. And then we're like little, I like to think of it like little bubbles that we're all kind of bouncing against each other. And we have to kind of make sure that everybody's little bubble bounces against each other in as gentle a way as possible and still get their needs met, you know.
Mhm.
That
I like that. I like that. I want you to go back a little bit because I know we say kind, gentle, and firmly, but can you give some examples of what that looks like? Because a lot of people might not even know what that looks like.
Yeah, yeah, actually, and I know that I can give you examples of that because really the best thing to do is to remember to leave the word you out of the sentence. Because if I'm trying to tell my husband something that I'm upset about, if I'm describing my personal experience of it instead of what he did, in other words, you did this, you did that, you did this is not going to go well. But if I say, I felt frustrated or I felt upset when I heard this and when I saw that, I like to describe what I saw or what I heard. So when I heard this or when I saw that, I felt really upset by it because of this, and I want to compromise in this direction. All I'm doing is describing my inner experience. I'm not describing his behavior. If we start using the word you in a sentence and describing the other person's behavior, they're going to automatically get defensive. And so if I'm saying, when I saw this or I heard this, I felt this way and I don't want that to happen anymore. So I'm asking that this be changed. I've set a boundary describing my personal experience and what I want changed. But if I say, you did this and you did that, and I want you to stop this and this and that, that person is automatically just going to get defensive. And so a kind, gentle, firm boundary is just describing my personal inner experience of what happened without using the word you and just setting a boundary of what I will or will not accept. Is that helpful?
And that's where the farm part comes in. So I like that. And it's okay for you to be you in the process. So what I like to say sometimes is, even if it doesn't make sense to the other person. So I have a thing where I'm a person who my natural speaking voice is loud. I talk loud. I know that. I understand that. But I'm also a person who doesn't like a lot of loud voices. And my husband will say, you don't like, as loud as you talk, you don't like loud voices. But as we discuss it and go forward, even if it doesn't make any sense, the fact that he loves me, he takes that into account. So he'll say, okay, yeah, I got to remember, you don't like loud voices. Let me bring it down. Even though I know that I am a person who talks very loudly. So that's just kind of one of those examples that be okay to be you through this process and explain what the issue is. And I know a lot of it is my own trauma background and the yelling and all. I can't do that. I don't want to do that. So he's able to be sensitive enough to that. And it actually enhances our relationship. And I will watch him actually do the work in his mind, like the wheels are turning to bring it down.
Mhm.
And it's like, okay, he's respected, and it makes me feel good through the process that of our relationship, that he thought enough, even if he was upset or felt particularly passionate about something, that he took the time to remember that the way that he wanted to relay that information to me had to be different even than what he was even feeling inside of his own self, which brings to mind also the notion of compromise and what that really can look like.
Yeah, and interestingly, that along those lines, when Serge and I were first married, he would have a tendency to pop off and get angry, and he would make the excuse, "I'm Italian," because he comes from an Italian family that settled in Brazil. He'd say, "I'm Italian," and I remember telling him early on one day, I said, "You know what? I don't care what nationality you are, I can't be talked to that way." It just because I just couldn't handle it. I can't handle anger. It just shuts me right down. Like you said, because of trauma from childhood. And he has respected that. He's always respected that. And he doesn't talk to me in anger, because of that. And I really appreciate that. And we can set those boundaries. And it was a boundary that I set early on. And those are the kind of things that I'm talking about, that have to be set early on in a relationship, that we can tell people how they can talk to us and how they can't talk to us. They can tell people what they can and can't do in our presence. But not only that, we can also tell people how I can be treated
Mhm.
in other ways, in many other ways. Here's what I'm willing to do. Here's what I'm not willing to do. And if we don't say it, we can't expect someone to know. The thing that I hate the most, or not hate the most, I shouldn't say hate, but I feel sad for people the most, is that when they tell me if he loves me, he would just know.
Right.
Why doesn't he just know? Why do I shouldn't have to say it? Well, yes, you do have to say it.
Yes, you do.
People cannot read your mind, but I know where it comes from. At least this is my theory of where it comes from. Is I know that as a young child in an abusive home, I did often fantasize about some person, probably even a man, coming into my life who would just know what I needed. He was going to be so kind and so wonderful, and he was just going to know what I needed, where people around me were not taking care of my needs. And this man was going to come into my world, and he was going to know what I needed, and it was a romantic fantasy that I thought was going to save me. And sadly, you get out there in the real world and you're dealing with real people, and the fantasy unfortunately persists, is that this person loves me so much, they know what I need, right? They're just going to know. And I believe that that is somewhat where that comes from, is the romantic fantasy that this person will know what I need. And maybe it's perpetuated a little bit by the fact that there are romantic comedies on television, but remember, somebody's already read the script when they're playing those parts,
Right.
and things like that. And there isn't someone out there that can read your mind and just know what you need, and someone hasn't read the script ahead a few lines.
Hmm.
And
And I,
so,
but
no, go
that's when
ahead.
I always say people wouldn't know. I mean, of course, it's my crude phrase, but people wouldn't know how to wipe their behinds if somebody didn't teach them. It is
Right.
okay for us to teach the person who comes into our life how to treat us. That's and there's a fine line between trying to change a person and just having the way they change how they deal with you. That's different. That is an acceptable request. I don't care if you've slapped every other person you've ever seen in your life. When you get to me, I expect for you not to slap me. That's just like a basic boundary. That's not something I'm going to deal with. And then the person understands, and the love they have for you allows them to respond in that way. So again, trying to change someone, that's not it. But being okay with asking someone to change the way in which they deal with you to line up with the boundaries that you all have set is very acceptable.
Right. It absolutely is. And so, some of the things that are really important here is just the fact that if you do have those boundaries and you set them up front with people about how they can and can't treat you, then what you're going to find is that your relationship goes along much better as it's going along, and it's sustainable. So, what you're going for is something that's sustainable from the beginning to the end, not something where in the beginning it's all wonderful and nobody's setting any boundaries, and then somewhere along the way, um, everybody's unhappy. And sometimes the thing I think is kind of sad is when people have not set boundaries for many years. And I do have clients who have come in for counseling, and they're way into years into their marriage, and boundaries have not been set. And now they're trying to set boundaries. And the dynamic of the relationship, sometimes they are really successful at changing the dynamic of their relationship and allowing boundaries to happen. And sometimes the relationship ends because the dynamic is just doesn't, it cracks under the shifting. But sometimes people have been really successful at setting the boundaries and adjusting to the boundaries that should have been set way earlier in the relationship, you know. And so that's why we're here talking about this, is recognizing that if we don't set those boundaries early enough in a relationship, it gets rigid, and then trying to set those boundaries will crack the relationship sometimes, and it's not repairable when you're trying to do it later on.
Thank you for joining us for It's All in Your Head podcast. Remember to subscribe, like, share, and please comment. Whatever mental health questions you have, we will be happy to answer them in future podcasts. I know as we're talking about this, we're saying in the beginning and we're giving time frames, but I like to look at the new way of dating, I would call it, in like a 5-step process. And this will help you hopefully kind of slow your mind down, because I feel like with this generation, it's kind of microwave dating. We want to jump into everything and be in a relationship and believe that life will be wonderful and not really even try to predict any of the challenges that we could have. So now that when I'm discussing dating with someone, I'm discussing it in a 5-step process. I'm saying step one is just meeting a person. Step two is deciding whether or not you can be friends. Step three is deciding whether or not you guys can even like each other in a romantic way. Step four is deciding whether or not you even want to date. And then when you get to step five, you're discussing whether or not you can actually be in a relationship with this person.
I like that because here's what's happening instead is people are hooking up for sex and trying to turn it into a relationship in a way where it's not working for people. They're so unhappy, it's breaking up, it's not working. Um, Everybody is really unhappy. At least the people that are talking to me about it are very unhappy. It's not working for them. And instead, they just give up on dating because all it's turning out to be is just a hookup for sex. And it's completely backwards. And that step process that you just talked about is how relationships should form. That is the normal way. When we were young, this is how we
Mm-hmm.
formed relationships
Mm-hmm.
because we did a whole lot of interacting. You had to do a whole lot of interacting first with people. But because people are not interacting anymore, they're getting it totally backwards. And so let's talk about that because we're going to be teaching people a lot more about how to slow that process down and connect the opposite way,
Mm-hmm.
which is let's just connect on a level of a person first, see if we
Absolutely.
can even be friends and go from there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how it should be. And boundaries can be set from the beginning, and that's why, because as you're connecting with a person from the beginning, little by little you are setting boundaries with them as you're building a friendship. And then as that friendship turns into a romance, more boundaries are set and on from there. And that's why this process you and I are talking about works, is because a relationship is forming from the get-go as a friendship and then into more of a romance and then into a relationship. And that's the only way that it's going to work, right?
Mm-hmm. And it
And so
allows you to respect the person more, respect what you're finding from the person, getting to know them. And that doesn't mean that you spill your life story and have people thinking, oh my gosh, this person is, something's not right here or something like that. It's what would you be comfortable talking to someone that you're not even thinking about being romantic with? And
right.
going forward with that, because I've had people say, I thought it was going to work. And I told them all my secrets. And now they're gone with all my secrets. And that's a whole nother level of anxiety that they have based around just that. Oh my gosh, I've said too much. So, how would you discuss the balance with what you say and what you don't say with someone, Michelle?
I'm glad that you brought that up because that kind of vulnerability does exist, and we develop friendships on levels. And we start out with level one, where we build an acquaintanceship, and that's where we just talk about things that are everyday things. We talk about the weather, we talk about current events, we find out people's positions on how they feel about their philosophy of life, so to speak, and we talk about those kind of things and we start building a friendship in that way. It's kind of more of an acquaintanceship.
Mhm.
And nobody feels particularly vulnerable in that place because we're not talking about our feelings, our hopes, our dreams, and our fears, right? And as we get a little bit deeper, we will explore talking about our feelings with someone. But what we're doing is we're checking to see if they accept us exactly as we are. We have to feel completely accepted for who we are with somebody. Now, we will explore that level with someone, but at the same time, if that other person does not explore that level with us, we feel too vulnerable.
Mhm.
And so we want to make sure that the other person is also giving on that same level. So if I give and tell somebody some of my life secrets and maybe I talk to them about my feelings, like things that have gone on with me, some of my hardest things that are happening in my life right now. And maybe that person says, "Oh, I've experienced that too. My mother also died when I was young," or whatever. And they talk about some of their life experiences. So now my vulnerability is matched with their vulnerability. And as people match vulnerabilities like that and both feel a sense that I'm not judged by the other person, we've both gone to a deeper level of emotional intimacy and we've passed the test with each other. And that test was, I'm completely accepted on this level by this person, right?
Mhm.
And then people will go to a deeper level there and they stay in that level as long as they're not judged by the other person. People will stay comfortably in that level as long as each person is sharing and not judging on that level. And then we can stay comfortably there. And that's the rules of that level is we have to stay completely non-judgmental with each other on that level. Now, if we want to go to a deeper level, and this is where we decide whether or not we're in a relationship, is that level 3 is where we decide how do we feel about each other and we can discuss it. How do
Mhm.
you feel about me? Where do you want me in your life?
Mhm.
And this is where we have a level 3 conversation is how do we feel about each other in our life? Are we and we decide we're best friends, we're good friends, we're lovers, we're going to be romantic. And then we go into level 3, but each person feels completely non-judged on that level again. And as
Mhm.
long as that non-judgmental, complete acceptance remains, the relationship remains safe for both people. And it's all okay as long as it remains completely non-judgmental and safe for each person. It can stay that way forever. But as soon as somebody enters in some sort of judgment or unsafe, something unsafe, then it becomes an unsafe relationship. And we're not always completely safe for each other. Sometimes we have to make repairs in that way. And we have to go back and say, hey, I said something mean or unsafe, and I apologize. And if we can apologize and keep repairing that in a way that isn't completely detrimental, then we can stay in that emotional intimacy. But it is so fragile. And that's what I don't think people understand. It's so fragile that you can break it and it does bleed to death, just like a living, breathing thing. You can stab it too many times and it bleeds to death, or you can neglect it and it dies of neglect. And so it's really important to understand the living, breathing nature of that intimacy that you're building with another person. I guess that's the best way I can explain it. What
I
about
think
for you?
I think that's great. And when you were talking, what came to my mind was people aren't always honest when they meet. And so it's like be very honest. So I know many of the young people who I am treating right now are dating with intent, is what they call it. They want to be able to find a long-term partner, but it's okay to say that from the beginning without putting unrealistic expectations on the other person. So that's where it gets into the notion of them not being where someone said, well, I'm not looking for a serious relationship, but they like the person. So then they'll say, I'm not looking for a serious relationship. Or, okay, it's okay that we're friends with benefits, when that's not what they want at
Mhm.
all. They want to be doing this dating with intent, or they want to be finding a serious life partner. So just to be very honest in the beginning and not put unrealistic expectations. I know lots of people are app dating or internet dating. Don't start dating a person and then require that they come off the apps. That's, I would
Yeah.
say, for lack of a better word, that's just being weird. Like, don't do that. Be honest about what it is you're doing. Now, if you choose to come up off of the apps because you like them, okay, but don't require that of someone else. And because a lot of times you'll force them, because they want to keep relationship with you, to start the process of being dishonest. Some people will just say, I'm not going to do that. Then they're branded as jerks when they're just telling you this is the reality. I don't want to do. So just to be cognizant of your expectations of other people and not to put that on them or not to be so forceful. You hear all these horror stories about people who kind of force someone into a relationship or force someone into something that they didn't really want to be in. And then when that person is running to get away, they're branded as a person who did something wrong or that kind of thing.
Okay, so good boundaries in the sense that you say what you want up front, and at the same time, you don't make any expectations of other people. And the boundary is I'm going to be completely honest here about what I want. At the same time, I'm also not going to um, force other people into something they don't want.
Right.
My boundary is it's all going to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's a
Mhm.
good way to say that. Yeah.
Yeah. I like it. I like it because you're right. There's so many different ways we can manipulate people into different things with dishonesty and all that kind of thing. And it just gets messy and complicated.
Mhm.
And really, it doesn't have to be complicated if we're just honest and have good boundaries. And you're right. If I want to date with intent, just say so. If the other person doesn't want to, have the courage to let go. Now, that's the hard part. I think the abandonment issues get really, really tricky with this. Years ago, when I was working in drug and alcohol treatment, there's a man that would come and talk with our residents there, and he talked about abandonment issues. And he said what he felt like it was important to understand is he said, imagine yourself standing with your feet like shoulder width apart, and you're completely stable in that position. And then people will come like butterflies around you. And he said, and some will circle around, and then they'll go away and they'll never stop, and others will circle around, and they'll land on your shoulder for a period of time, and then they'll go away. And he said, and some people will circle around and land, and they'll stay. And he said, but if as soon as you start grabbing for the butterflies, you're off balance. And
Mm.
what he was trying to make you understand is that as you grabbed and clung to people in any way, you were off balance from that place where you are your most, stable. And he was encouraging people to just stay in that stable position and not cling or allow people in any way, let them come and go, and that eventually one of those butterflies is going to flit around and then stay. You know, and I like to think about that analogy as I think about people that come and go in my life that maybe I would love to cling to, but I'm not going to cling, you know?
Mm-hmm. And I also have talked to people about just the anxiety that comes along with wanting to be in a relationship. So as they're starting the process of dating, you see that from the very beginning where it's almost like they're holding on for dear life. It's like that's not an
Mhm.
acceptable way. And maybe if that is how you feel, you have to do some internal searching and you might not be at the point where you're ready to date with intent. That doesn't mean you can't meet people. That doesn't mean you can't have fun. That doesn't mean you can't, in a sense, practice those social skills that you need, but you may not be at a point where you're ready to have a very serious committed relationship. So you've got to
Right.
do some more internal work. And if you've gone through a bad relationship, I always suggest that people get counseling, not just because I'm a counselor, but just go get some counseling, talk some of those things through with someone else. Because if we're left to our own devices, a lot of times we make those same mistakes over and over and over and over again.
I agree. Or we start perceiving that the new person in our life is behaving just like the last person when they're not. I've had that with a client or two where they've come in for trauma therapy because a relationship has been so traumatic for them, and they're bringing the same, a dynamic into the current relationship where the current partner is going, hey, that's not what I'm doing at all, but they're perceiving the same things as happening, even though they're not. And
Mhm.
so it is really important to get some therapy and some time or whatever you need in order to get over a past really bad relationship for sure.
Thank you for joining us for episode 18 of It's All in Your Head podcast. And remember,
Mental health matters.
And if you don't deal with your stuff, it's going to deal with you. Bye-bye.
Bye.